Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's RiskNZ Lunchtime seminar. My name is Regan Smith, and I'm the Vice Chair for the RiskNZ Board. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the support of the RiskNZ sponsors who make all this possible, and in particular, IBM. But on top of that, there are key sponsors of KPMG, CAMS, Protect, Aon, LexisNexis, and the Insurance Business New Zealand. So all participants in the meeting have been put on mute, so please feel free to type any questions straight into the Q&A as we go along, but we'll hold any questions till the end so we can have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So today's topic is the role of technology in managing risk, and it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Tanvi from KPMG. Tanvi leads the enterprise risk services in Auckland, and her focus is on supporting organizations on taking a structured approach to implementing an effective GRC tool that is fit for purpose and meets the organization needs. So it's quite a hot topic for today, and I'll hand over to you now, Tanvi.
Thanks, Regan. So just moving over for today's topic, and before I do that, I'll probably give a bit of an intro as well. So kia ora, I'm Tanvi. I lead up the enterprise risk team for KPMG in Auckland. I'm also the national lead for Powered Risk, which is all about developing a target operating model and the relevant supporting structures around it, the technology solutions that you choose to make it more effective and enable it to deliver the desired value as well for the organizations. Now, in terms of today's topic, it's quite the one that has been of that a lot of discussion of late, and more so because your technology can be as effective as the structures that you build around it, which is also the most important point, but more often the most missed point as well. At the same time, you can implement the most expensive GRC solution that you want, and then it still fails to deliver the value that you want it to deliver as well. For example, I've probably been on a secondment in a multinational bank that spent millions of dollars on a GRC solution, a top-end GRC solution, and kind of did not boost across the organization because people found it difficult. They were not trained around it. There were a lot of a lack of awareness in terms of what it does, how to use it efficiently as well. So today's kind of discussion is more around discovering, why does things like these happen where you implement a GRC solution, but it's not delivering the beauty factors for things like this. And what's the right approach in terms of adopting a right GRC solution that is fit for purpose and meets your organization requirements, but also in terms of, how do you structure it in a way to make it a lot more effective for your organization as well. So just briefly in terms of the agenda for today's session, it's going to be the challenges that risk professionals have been facing over the last decade or so that has really called a need for a technology solution to make life a lot more easier, but also enabling the risk professionals to focus their attention on quality discussions and conversations with the executives and the boards, rather than spending a majority of their time in terms of collating the information from the business units and bringing in form of some report in front of the executives or the board as well. And then moving on to, what are some of the challenges that a lot of organizations we here have faced in terms of choosing a right GRC solution and implementing it? And then what do we need to do it right in terms of selecting the key considerations, that you need to have while selecting a GRC tool, but also in terms of, how do you, what's the right approach and form a bit more structured and form a bit of it to kind of make your GRC tool more effective as well. Some of the key learnings that we have had from the last decade or so since I started doing GRC implementation, that's probably from a decade back. In other part of the world, and where to from here, because GRC is just the start of it. So in terms of the key challenges that the risk professionals have faced over time, and we'll probably just quickly go through some of the key ones over here, is the most common one being the inconsistent processes that are being followed across the organization that kind of render the functional processes as ineffective in most occasions. A lot of manual processes that are put in place and really hardly add any much of the value in terms of the time and the efforts kind of that is spent through those manual processes, and the inefficiencies in terms of, how rarely do an organization kind of even review value or not? Are they effective or not? Or sometimes, what's written is not what's followed as well. So there are gaps in terms of, what's written and what's actually being done. And most of the times you will hear people say, this is how we do things, because there's no single source of truth for those. Next, moving into some of those common people challenges, and that's more in terms of, working out, do we have the right kind of capabilities and capacities to meet those business requirements as well? Because, even if you have the right people with the right skill sets, but then if they are short on the capacity in terms of having to do a lot more as part of their risk management requirements, then there's a very high likelihood that they are going to be cutting corners that will exacerbate the risk. And sometimes it exacerbates the risk in some of those most important risk environments, like health and safety as well, which can have a very big consequence on the organization, both from the harm caused, but also from a reputational and the legal perspectives as well. So that's really important. The clarity on the ownership, and that's especially in the cases where, a business process touches different parts of the organization and their interdependencies, that each of the business unit has, and even bigger problem when these roles and responsibilities are not clearly articulated or understood. A good example would be a lot of those recent, the banking reports of the 3 lines of defense, where line 2 is still operating and doing the stuff that line 1 risk needs to be doing, and going way beyond their role of, just providing guidance and oversight and, answering queries where required. So having a clear view in terms of who's doing what, rather than saying it was assumed that the other part of the business would be managing some of those risk and controls. So a clear ownership of risk issues, controls, obligations has been missing for a long time, despite multiple efforts to put 3 lines of defense in place. And that's even common in most of the financial services organizations as of today as well. A reactive risk culture where, there's more focused on responding after things have occurred, rather than proactively and, effectively monitoring some of those key kind of indicators that would have signaled for a downside risk, event happening in near future as well. And I think that's a key function that kind of highlighted the need of a technology solution, because as risk professionals, we are a lot busy in collating the information that is required, that is, that will support our conversations with the business, and less focused on really the key drivers. So we are very much focused on the trends and, is it the risk moving upwards or downwards, rather than saying, okay, we see the risk outlook kind of going upwards, but not spending enough time on some of those key conversations with the executives and the board in terms of what those key drivers are for these, and what is currently being done as an organization to manage some of those requirements. And it's more just focus on, how much percentage increase, and less on what's contributing to it. What are we doing at the moment as an organization to mitigate this? What's our plan to manage this risk in a much better manner in future? Are we actually calling out on, the actual root causes for those drivers, or are we still more focused on some of those, immediate band-aid fixes as well? So that has been a challenge for a long time that we as risk professionals have faced in terms of managing our kind of priorities and areas where that we focus on, and absence of a proper technology solution as well. And the other part is more in terms of, having a very clear idea of our service delivery models in terms of how, what are the different processes in which we kind of provide our services to our end customers. And that kind of covers different aspects of it. It's like, what are these activities? Who's delivering it? How are they being delivered? What's the environment in which they are being delivered as well? Because that together also forms a big part in terms of, how much value are we going to get from automating this as part of the process as well, and bringing a technology solution that actually meets those requirements. And then if all of that has not been properly aligned, that adds to a bigger problem that we have been facing already. And then from a technology perspective, the most common one that I've probably heard from a lot of my clients has been too many legacy system solutions that they're struggling to keep up with. A lot of these where they are more towards their end of life, and it's hard to even find someone who can actually operate and support in the process as well. And then it's a more of a technology debt that has been developed by that organization over a period of time, and it's hard to get rid of. And especially when you have too many of them, these technologies, it's hard to even maintain that technology kind of architectural environment and support them. The other key problem is in terms of having too many siloed systems that operate within your environment, and especially when you've got something that is not one source of truth, but multiple systems across, and then they don't talk to each other. They don't have a good user interface. They are very dry to use, and people start losing interest as well. So a lot of that has been a lot of problem in the past. And then moving towards some of those performance insights and data. And the key factor has been like, sometimes, and probably I can give a more recent example is, you want business units to provide you kind of the KPIs that they provide, and sometimes they come up with a big list. Very few times do they actually sit back and review that list to see if it's really relevant metrics that they are capturing. Are they capturing metrics for a limited area or a particular part of the business, and is it kind of aggregating overall to provide an enterprise view in terms of how that particular risk is being managed? A lot of the indicators which provide a historic view of risk, and that has probably been a struggle because a lot of the risk, to make it effective, needs to be future focused, needs to be more, in terms of what's coming rather than what's already happened. So something, a lot of the existing matrix within the organizations tend to be lag indicators rather than lead indicators, and they kind of add very little value in terms of the risk reporting and the insights that is relevant for the board or the executive teams as well. And that kind of leads us to the last one, which is the governance, in terms of saying, as risk professional, our biggest responsibility is towards the board and the executive teams, because it's more in terms of saying, how do we support them in terms of, providing the right kind of insights and the information. And there has been little done in this case. The Section 95 reports that the regulator and the FMA has been releasing on the banks, which have had like a proper I would probably say, which you would likely to believe would have the right kind of risk management processes, have also struggled to put in the right kind of governance, which tends to be at times siloed. It doesn't give boards and the executives enough insights to maintain an oversight, or challenge the executives in terms of the decisions that are being made and how those are being made as well, and the supporting information that really is the crux of a good governance process. So those are some of those key challenges that I've commonly heard from a wide range of risk professionals. And we tend to say that, it's hard to get risk right. It's always evolving. And so the approach needs to evolve to keep up with that pace as well. And technology is a key factor to kind of, or an enabler for this as well. So that really needs to be considered in terms of, how do we make our technology a lot more effective to deliver the value that we desire out of it. Now, that actually took a change where in the recent times, there has been an increasing amount of focus in terms of, implementing a GRC tool. And suddenly, especially in the New Zealand and the Australian market, the demand for a GRC technology went up, where people wanted to put in a technology solution to ease their life. And what that created is, while the demand went up, I think it was more focused just on the technology rather than saying, okay, how do we implement the technology right to get the value out of it, like I said earlier. And some of those key challenges that people have faced, which have rendered their GRC implementation ineffective, I've listed probably a few down over here. And the first one is more in terms of lack of clear vision and structure around the future state. And then that's where, people, if you ask a particular business or a risk team in terms of what are your requirements, they come up with the big laundry list of items. And it's more like a wish list rather than the actual requirements that are relevant, and that will kind of cater to the future state of, what you have in mind for your organization. So that's been, there has been a clear kind of disconnect in terms of, having a very clear vision for your risk function, as well as the value that your risk function is going to contribute to your organization. So that needs to be very clear, to have a very defined scope through which, you can actually work out what your requirements are, what your functional requirements are, what your technology requirements are, to kind of have a more structured approach and a targeted approach for your GRC implementation. And the next one is about, lacking that clarity in terms of what good looks like. The most common phrase being, we want gold standard, in terms of all the processes, but it's more in terms of saying, do you actually need those? Does that really support your long-term sustainability of the organization? Or does it need to be very basic? Or do you need to make some changes to it to meet your requirements and needs of the future for your organization as well, rather than saying, a basic solution would work, or whether you need a gold standard one? And the next one was in terms of, what are the right sizing of the resourcing requirement that is required to even deliver something that big as a risk transformation, because it's not just a technology solution implementation, it's way beyond. It's working out an operating model with the technology at the heart of it. But if you don't get the structures right, if you don't have it if you don't get a good amount of buy-in through training and awareness, which is the next point that we're talking about, is around those technology solutions. If people don't know how to use it, if people don't know what are the different reporting that can be run out of it, if it's not structured well, if the functionality is not tailored to the requirements, it will render your GRC implementation as ineffective, with a little value for it to be adding as well. And then lastly, while technology is important, it is not the sole area of focus. So you can have the best technology solution implemented, like I said earlier, and it can be very much unused and ineffective within your organization if you haven't built the right structure and the processes, whether it's like functional processes, it's more about, getting in terms of clarity in mapping your roles and responsibilities to your functional processes, and also in terms of, deciding in terms of how kind of detailed your functional processes need to be, and how well that aligns with the technical functionalities of the solutions that you have chosen as well. So all these factors are really the ones that sometimes render your GRC implementation as ineffective. And moving on, and probably before I move on to the next one, we'll quickly like to check if someone wants to put in the chat, have you had a risk technology solution implemented within your organization? And if someone has experienced any of the key challenges, or maybe probably something additional as well, and is wanting to share their views, happy to take those as well, either now or towards the end of the presentation. And then moving towards the next one in terms of, so what are the drivers that you need to consider while choosing a GRC solution? And the first one is the size and the complexity of the organization. And I say this very often, but not everyone needs a Ferrari. Sometimes a Subaru is just fine. It works, it does the job, if you don't want to spend heaps. And you don't have to always spend $1 million on a GRC technology implementation, which people tend to believe is the case if you're going for a risk solution or a GRC technology. So it's really important to consider what is the size and the nature of the sector in which you operate, the extent of the complexities of your business functions and operations, and is the an out of the box GRC kind of solution might just be more suitable for your organization rather than going for a a full end GRC solution like a ServiceNow or RSA Archer as well. And sometimes those out of the box solution might just meet your needs. So it's really important to understand in terms of what your requirements are. A good way to kind of do this is doing a Moscow analysis, which is more you're identifying, as a business unit, what are your must-haves, should-haves, and could-haves. And that kind of gets you, identifying your requirements into 3 different buckets while choosing a GRC solution. So you know that, what are those must-have requirements, functional requirements from a technology perspective that you need to have, or that your GRC solution needs to have, versus what's good to have, but not probably is a showstopper as well. So you probably need to work that out, while talking to your businesses, but also in terms of doing an internal kind of workshops as risk teams to understand what those requirements would be and what's really the right kind of size fit for your organization. The next one is the technology architecture, and the key factor to consider is you don't want to complicate your existing IT architecture, and that kind of happens when you have multiple different solutions meeting the different requirements of the business, and that could be something like you have one solution managing your compliance requirements or the different obligations that are relevant for your organization, while you have one particular risk system solution to meet your IT risk, another one for the third party, another one for your wider enterprise risk as well. And it gets even worse when they don't talk to each other, because sometimes you can have controls that can mitigate multiple risks, or they can mitigate a business process risk, but also an obligation requirement as well. An example could be like an access control. So it helps kind of mitigate a business process risk from an unauthorized access, but also in terms of saying obligation requirements related to privacy risk, for example, as well. So you really need to consider in terms of what is your existing technology architecture like? What are the different platforms that you currently have put in place? And is there a way in which, you can have like a single source of truth for all the different types of risk or the requirements that you're wanting to put in place for your organization? If it's one place of truth, it's a lot more easier to manage over time as well in terms of, the development that's requirement and growing that technology requirements over time. The other key part to consider is, do you go for an out-of-the-box solution or do you go for a comprehensive GRC implementation? When you go for an out-of-the-box, it's usually a lot more pre-configured technology solutions. A lot of these are subscription-based, so you can easily manage, your spend on those technology solutions versus, if you go for a full-end implementation cost, there would be, enterprise-wide licenses around those ones, in terms of the annual license fees across all the users in the organization, or, might cover a particular number of enterprise licenses as well. But they usually tend to be a bit more on the expensive side. So really working out in terms of what your requirement is. Sometimes out-of-the-box solutions are as good as the customizable ones, depending in terms of, where your requirements are. Do you want something that can have multiple modules that you can grow and develop as you implement and expand the use of your GRC solution? Or do you need something that needs to heavily interact with a lot of other systems that are currently in play and that you plan to have around more from a futuristic view for your organization as well? So that also is a key important driver while choosing your GRC solution. The next point is about, what is working out what is the extent of an ongoing support that you may require. And that's more in terms of saying, do you have a proper in-house capabilities built in, or a lot of capability within your people skill sets to kind of manage the solution on an ongoing basis? Or would you prefer to have something like a managed service solution where you don't really have to worry in terms of maintaining that particular platform, the solution updates that come through from time to time, or even the wider support in terms of managing your risk and compliance register, or tracking some of those updates that are coming through as the legislations evolve and change and there are newer requirements being published as well. And also from another factor to consider would be your ongoing support from a managed service sometimes also includes providing ongoing training and awareness. So once you have implemented a system, and we are in this market where people change jobs. So the ones that are around when the GRC system implementation is done may not stay on for say 5 or 10 years down the line. So you have a managed service option to consider managed service options, wherein organizations provide that ongoing training and development requirements. So you can have like a how user training for on the particular technology solution from say every quarter or every 6 months or on an annual basis. So you can really work that out in terms of what the requirements are, and what kind of providers or partners kind of provide that service. Next is in terms of understanding what is really the maturity of your current risk management framework and processes, and also in terms of what's your plan in terms of uplifting that kind of risk management maturity, or the framework and the processes that it currently follows versus what is your vision for your organization as well. So that will kind of decide in terms of, do you need a base solution, or or your future requirement would require a wider set of configuration and customization. Now, when you talk about configuration, it's more about selecting the functionalities that are currently built in within the system, whereas customization is more around, going a bit beyond and building on some of those built-in system functionalities as well. So something that you really want to consider while selecting your GRC solution would be, what is your current maturity and where do you want to go in the next 5 to 10 years from your risk management framework or process perspective. And the last one is scalability. And I probably have, kind of covered it just now, was more in terms of making sure that, your vision is for the next 5 to 10 years, and it's not short term. You really want, and you really should, to take this as an opportunity to plan and uplift your risk management framework and the processes around it to take a 10-year view of their pathway rather than it just meeting their current needs and requirements of the business. And that is really important because what's effective and meets the requirements now in the short term, if it's like a process mapping tool, may not meet the requirement of the organization as well as your risk function when you look at it 5 or 10-year timeframes as well. So some really good key consideration that that go beyond just the technology functionalities as well that you need to keep in mind while selecting your GRC solution. And moving on in terms of, if these were the considerations, what's really the approach that you need to take while kind of structuring your, GRC implementation process. And we break it down into those 6 elements, which is your functional process, people, service delivery model, technology, performance, insights and data, and governance. And starting with the first one around is the, the functional processes. And that kind of says in terms of, what is the right size, but also in terms of the risk operating model that would work well and would involve, the relevant good practices that are relevant to your organization, the sector in which you operate, and the complexities and the nature of your operations. And, that will kind of determine how detailed your functional processes for risk management need to be. Also, the frequency of the risk activities and what kind of frameworks and policies do you need to put in place that then need to align and be supported by your technology solution. And sometimes in terms of, it's more about arranging how your different parts or policies, say, health and safety frameworks, your business continuity framework, and how does that kind of align well with your enterprise-wide risk management framework, but also the wider processes that they kind of support, and how would that be then supported by one technology platform, preferably that meet those different requirements as well. So, it's really important in terms of charting that view down for your functional processes and how they would probably grow and support the organization to grow in the next 5-10 years as well. And then it's more in terms of the people. So once you have identified, what your future state functional process or a risk operating or risk function operating model will look like, then it's the next stage is in terms of mapping, the role profiles to those functional processes. And that kind of helps you understand in terms of how big does your risk function needs to be to deliver on those expectations. If you're a big organization, then the ideal size and the role structures across the 3 lines of defense, and also in terms of clarifying, the individual job profiles and roles and responsibilities at each for each role that you identify within those functional processes as well. And then it kind of helps create that kind of clarity and articulation of who owns the risk, who owns particular controls, and who owns particular obligations across the organization as well. So that once your functional processes are in place, The next one is mapping of your people, and then you know what your ideal structure needs to be to deliver on the next stage, which is your service delivery model. So when you do that, it's more about end-to-end, process for delivering your services, and how do you then kind of embed or integrate your 3 lines of defense or model within those service delivery models as well. So that's really important. And then that kind of structure and processes is once you have that in place, that kind of then goes to the next one, which is your technology solution in terms of the different, platforms that you have considered, and then kind of selecting the ones, and then kind of structuring to say, okay, this is my functional process, this is my service delivery model, these are the different roles and responsibilities that I need to create, and then looking at the technology functionalities as well in terms of how will that cater to the requirements that you have just identified. Sometimes it could be they are pre-configured in a lot many manners as well in terms of the requirements that have been identified, and they cover a good approach for your risk management processes, but also have already done the mapping of your the people roles and responsibilities across the different risk management process as well. In a way that kind of you can have technology solutions that have multiple modules. So you'll have specific modules for internal audit. You can have specific modules for risk. You can have specific modules for compliance as well. So you do have technology solutions that kind of support your different functional processes and roles and responsibilities across the 3 lines of defense. And then it's more about, identifying the right kind of performance indicators. And that is going to, working out what's really the key ones that help you identify, where your risk is heading, but also in terms of what are the key drivers for those indicators as well. And rather than coming up with a big list, I think a fewer but a bit more value adding indicators is really relevant, that could strike a conversation at the board and the executive level. And that kind of leads us to the last part, which is building the right governance structures as well. Your risk management is deemed to be effective if it's driving the right conversations with the board and the executives. And that's always the key and the most important factor that you need to keep in mind, even when you're developing your GRC solution and approach in terms of, who's going to be the audience for the different risk report that you generate. What sort of risk insights is it going to provide to them? What sort of discussion is it going to support at that level? Is it going to do the indicators that you have identified help board or the executives, not just maintaining oversight in terms of how the risk is being mitigated or is kind of evolving in the current landscape, but also in terms of saying, what are we doing in this space? Are we doing enough? Are we operating within our appetite? Is it aligned to our strategy? Is it aligned to the direction in which we are heading? If it supports generating those insights, that is where you kind of see your technology adding value rather than it just being a place where your risk registers are being managed, or just being a way in which you kind of track some of those indicators, but they don't really drive that sort of conversation at the senior leadership level, or where it doesn't support the executives in making informed decisions as well around, risk creating or developing risk management strategies as well for some of those really essential or key risks for the organization. Now, the next part is talking about some of the key learnings, and the first one is called about clear vision, and it's more in terms of it's kind of working out those probably 5 or 10 key outcomes that you really want to achieve through that GRC technology implementation, rather than just saying we want to go off spreadsheets. Yes, that can be a good starting point, but that's not the most relevant or the last destination that you want to achieve. It's way beyond that. And then the next one is being, it's a lot more than just a technology implementation. It's more about uplifting your risk culture, but also your risk management process, and how do you approach, your risk operating model and kind of structure it to meet your long-term requirements. Being very bold and agile about it in your vision, because this is a very, very good transformation journey if you make it to be one, and it can be a lot more than just doing things in a system rather than in a spreadsheet. So it's a lot more than that. You need to get a lot of buy-in from the business and when on your risk functions to make it effective. If they are not as on this journey in terms of having the right kind of a technology solution or using it, it's not going to be very effective in the long run. It's not going to be driving the value that you want it to be. The risk solution is as good as the data that goes into it, and as much as the business kind of makes an effort to kind of keeping it live and making sure that the updates are captured properly, and kind of the system is generating the key insight that it should for the different parts of the organization, especially the management and the board. And probably the most important one that I kind of have is, taking that long-term view rather than a short-term view, and making sure that it kind of aligns with the long-term strategy, and can be scalable as and when the business grows in future as well, rather than a short-term process mapping tool. So really making sure that you choose the right technology from that perspective. And so where to from here? And I've probably got on the screen some of those dashboards as well. That the example I tend to give is something that I've heard from my client previously is, we had just done an implementation of a GRC solution, and one of our clients shared their experience around it, and it was more in terms of saying, before, when they didn't have a GRC technology solution, and if there was some breach, they would have to go to different parts of the business, understand what controls have been put in place, collate, probably take a week to have those meetings and collate that information in terms of the control effectiveness environment, to really even understand if something like an IT breach or a cybersecurity event that has happened at a competitor could occur within their organization, or how vulnerable was their organization to that particular risk. Whereas with the technology solution, things become, a lot more as single source of, not just a single source of truth, but also in terms of maintaining live data in terms of how your control environment is looking like, what's your inherent risk ratings looking like, what are your indicators suggesting in terms of the strength of your control environment, but also in terms of where your risk landscape is moving, and how that is being evolving over a period of time. And that's all with just a few clicks, rather than having to hold multiple meetings with the heads of or the risk managers that are spread across the organization. And then it's more of saying that, when you want to generate a risk report, it's more about saying, okay, everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are. Everyone has done their part in terms of the control testing, the risk assessments during the year. And now we get to a point where, as a risk professionals, it's a lot more easier, because you're now relying on these reports to be extracted from the system, and then your responsibility is more in terms of focus on generating the insights that is coming out from these risk reports as well, and more providing those emerging risk trends and discussion in terms of what's changing, what's evolving for your risk landscape for the organization, and what are you doing in that space. And some of it could come through from the actions that are already being managed and monitored through the system, but also in terms of a generic insight-driven reporting to the management and the board. And that is the growing need of the business and the growing need of the business environment as well. And that's what the directors of today are wanting to have to say, yes, we know what our existing risks are, and we can, kind of get that focus from the risk reports that are being generated. But, how do we then focus the attention through a risk technology solution, where the risk people then more focus on driving the conversations at the board and the management around the drivers and what's being done in the space. So, and that requirements and expectations are only going to evolve from here, especially when you have something like an AI technology will being developed. You have your more risk being introduced in the system, in your environment, in your business environment as well, but also in terms of how do you use those GRC solutions going forward. And that the conversation that a lot of technology providers are now having is, how do you integrate something like an AI to work, or a natural language processing kind of tools to integrate with your GRC solution to drive some of those key insights as well from time to time. Generate some of those reports in terms of assessment of your controls and how they have been described in your GRC tool, but and also in terms of are they the most relevant ones, and then how effective is your mapping of your risk and controls. So yes, a lot of work from an AI perspective or from a natural language processing in terms of is also happening in the background. So a lot of these GRC solutions are on that path of growth and evolution, as well as we're likely to see in the years to come. And that's pretty much it from my end in terms of what we have for today. So really keen to, take any questions that you may have.
Excellent. Thanks, Tanvi. That's a great presentation covering quite a range of factors to consider. I particularly resonate with the idea that the system needs to be able to facilitate a future-focused conversation for the boards and exec teams. That's a really good point. So there is a question or comment that sort of leads to a question in the Q&A. If you haven't already done so, though, if you want to put in any further questions, just type them into the Q&A box for the meeting. But the question that's there at the moment is actually saying that they're facing the need to adapt an existing software solution because there's no appetite to implement anything new. But they're trying to tailor the system to meet their needs, but that's struggling to achieve something that they're having a high level of confidence in. So they're wondering how to get better buy-in from the business units.
Yeah,
So
and
if
I
you have
think
any thoughts.
I think a good starting point in terms of is analyzing what are your functional requirements. So understanding where is that struggle that the business is having to get a buy-in as well, and kind of aligning that business buy-in comes up probably a bit later, but in terms of the functionalities that you really want the system to deliver, and if it's like a must-have, then it's more around working out your functional processes as well in terms of how does the technology support it. A lot of the times the business buy-in comes from training and awareness, and you'd probably need to show them the value in terms of how it's going to ease their life, rather than them having to look through the different parts of the organization for information. And the more people start putting in, and the more it becomes a single source of truth, the more buy-in you'll automatically get through it. It's always a journey. It's never an easy thing to roll out. It takes a while. So probably starting small and then expanding and getting that business buy-in is probably the way forward, I would suggest. But
Yeah,
you can
nice.
always do like a short-term current state assessment and work out the pathway in terms of what those key roadblocks are and what the way in which you need to plan your actions as well. Is it the system, or is it more about the training and the capabilities around it?
Yeah, that's a great point. Being able to measure always makes a difference, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
See what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
Cool. There's no other questions that have been added to the Q&A, so I'd just like to say thanks, Tanvi. It's been a really useful time just to hear what you had to say. And I think we've all picked up quite a lot in terms of do's and don'ts when looking at GRC systems. So thanks everyone else for joining us and enjoying this lunchtime seminar. The recording will be sent out in the next couple of days. And just a plug from RiskNZ's point of view, if you aren't already a member, then please get in touch. We'd love to bring more people on board. And thanks everyone again for joining, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next event.
Thank you.
Bye.